This house has had a few owners before me, and they had a shelf here and they mounted it with these plastic anchors. Some people will just pound them through the wall, but if you just drive a screw into it partially, you can just wiggle them out. Some people even just paint over them. Again, I like to be professional. I want to have a really nice finish. So I will take a knife and trim off that paper fiber that sticks out, because no matter how much you sand, when you paint, when you fill in paint, they're going to be there. So there's a couple of ways of doing it. You can use the screwdriver and push that fabric in, clean it all up nice. You can take a knife and just kind of clean up that area a little bit and get away from that fiber, so that when you fill it, the fiber doesn't just keep coming out with the sandpaper as you sand your filler down smooth. There's a couple other holes here. They're just screw holes. Gently poke them in. And then now we'll have a smooth enough finish. So you can see I put on one quick coat. These were some pretty big holes. It's soaked in quite a bit, but now it's dry. I want to put on a couple more coats. I feel a little bit of a low spot on some of these others as well. But I use just an all-purpose filler and put it on fairly thin. Just because it makes it easier, quicker to sand. I'd rather do a few thin coats than a real thick coat and then make a real dusty mess. This area will take several coats where that silicone pulled away the paint. There's a couple of methods that you can use for sanding. On a real smooth wall like this, I like to use a larger screen type sander. It doesn't plug up as quick. But as you get into corners, along baseboards and trim, these work really good for that too. I'm going to start by just sanding this down and make sure it's smooth. There's some little pieces of paper and fiber that are sticking out that I need to sand off. Might need another coat. And yeah, if you can fill them, they're going to show up in the paint, especially on a smooth surface like this. And I'll go back over these with another coat. Maybe even take 2 coats. So when dings and dents like these on trim, what I find works best is to just fill it with my finger. You just kind of push the filler in, just leave it high, and then go back later with a straight, smooth sandpaper and just sand it down. Now that the filler on the trim is dry, I'm just going to use my sponge block. It's got a nice crisp edge, and sand that nice and smooth. And then I'll be ready to paint the trim, and the walls are ready, and I just need a couple spots on the ceiling. somebody years ago, before I bought this place, had touched up some nail holes, it looks like. But what they do a lot of the times when the sheetrockers put the ceiling up, they will tack in the edges with nails and then screw it all down. So those nails eventually, they start to back out. And what I'll do is I'll just pop that nail out and then fill that hole. And there's obviously enough screws and then the tape and mud along the edges that'll hold that edge nice and solid. And then I can go back and paint along that edge. And I want a two-tone again, like this room is now. It's a little bit darker color than I have in the rest of the house. You can see how poorly this two-tone paint was done. And I'll show you the way I do it and get a nice professional finish. When I bought the house, there was several different jugs of paint. This one is marked ceiling, and I know in some areas of the house that's a perfect match. But there's other areas where it's not. And I'm hoping that's not the case. I'm hoping it's a better match than that, because I don't want to have to repaint this whole ceiling. But I have enough paint to do it. Hopefully I don't have to. Now, as you can see along this ceiling, there are areas where you see a lot of white on the wall, or you see a little bit of color on the ceiling. So the last guy just freehanded it. I like to freehand again. I like to freehand myself. I've got a good steady hand, but one of the most important parts of painting and freehanding is a really good brush. This Purdy brush, I really like Purdy's. They're a little more money, but they last and last. I've had some of these Purdy brushes for many, many years, many, many hours of painting. I got two different sizes. I like to use the big one when I'm cutting in on corners. I like the smaller ones when I'm cutting in along the ceiling or along the floor. In order to get rid of this wavy edge along the ceiling, I will paint a little bit over onto the wall with the white paint. And then when I go back and paint the color on the wall, then I'll freehand that line. And with a really good quality brush, you can brush along with the brush tip along the area that you want to have control of. If you try to go the opposite direction this way, it's very difficult to control the bead of that paint and how it comes out of your brush. Where if you go across this way, apply some paint, and then just press it up along that edge. You have a lot more control. So I'm going to use this brush, and I'm going to paint all the ceiling first. The piece of baseboard trim that was right here came over and ended at a cabinet. So to get this piece all the way, rather than putting a splice there, I could splice it. I had some baseboard and some door frames that was in the garage of the house when I bought it, that the contractor had left. And I took this board down to match it, and I cannot match this exact piece anymore. Luckily, there was a few pieces in the garage. I hate splicing, but you can see this piece is just about an inch and a half short. Luckily, it's behind the washer and dryer unit in the corner. I do have another piece where I can fill this area across the back of the washer and dryer. So at least I'll have a really nice professional finish. As much as I hate seaming right there, I'm going to cut a 45-degree angle on both pieces so that they overlap, and then seam that together and fill it as best as I can. Luckily, it's not in the middle of the wall anywhere where it's going to be seen. It is going to be hidden in the corner. Like I say, normally I wouldn't do that, but since I can't get this trim anymore, I can't find it anywhere, I don't really have a choice. To start off with then, I'm going to paint that. Right now it's just in white primer, so I'll paint that piece to match the rest. That is kind of yellow. It was originally white. Being in a dark, cavernous room like this, for some reason oil-based paint turns yellow over time. The door frame is still bright white. You can see it against the white primer. It's a gloss white enamel. So I have a gloss white enamel that I'm going to repaint all of this trim to bring it all back to its former glory. And that piece of baseboard then I will clean up and put behind the washer and dryer. So I went ahead and just tacked that baseboard on, and then I'll go back along and caulk it just to give it that real high-end professional finish. I like to keep a wet rag to just keep my finger damp. Since I'm going to go back along and paint, I want to paint the white on top of this caulk to seal it. If you don't seal up the caulk with some paint, it collects dirt. This caulk is old and it's kind of set up a little bit, so I'll have to work it a lot more than I normally would. But if you're on a budget like I am, you make do with what you have. Now that I have the caulking in and it's dry, I just put one coat on it over the primer, and now I need a second coat because it's pretty transparent. Plus, as you can see, this baseboard was white. It is turned yellow, so I need to paint it as well. And so that I can seal up that caulking, I'm going to go a little bit high on the wall. And I want to go high on the wall because it's easier for me to go back and cut in from the wall down onto the baseboard than it is to cut in the top of the baseboard. You can do it along the top of the baseboard with a real steady hand, but you can't keep a good flow of paint going. Leastwise, I've found it. It's just easier for me to go from the top down, and then I don't even have to mask. If you don't have a real steady hand or a really good brush, you can mask this off and then just paint right up against the masking tape. But I figured the amount of time that it takes to put the masking tape on, I can go along and brush and do it and be done before the time that it takes to put on the masking tape and just the waste of tape. Masking tape is getting expensive. And by putting on a second coat, I can cover up those nail hole areas too. I've got some little nails that I put in, and when I put filler over those nails, it is noticeable, but now I can just hit it with another coat and cover up those nails, as well as seal up that top edge. And then I'll go around and paint this other side as well. Getting down along the bottom edge without getting paint on the floor, again, you can mask, or, and there I go, getting paint on the floor, or I like to just get my brush right down close and just follow the floor. Do a little bit of a bouncing edge to kind of force paint down. And it's done. When it comes to an inside corner like this, there's a couple of ways you can do it. I always preferred cutting a 45-degree angle on both pieces and then just sliding them together and then filling it. Another way you can do it is to actually trim this baseboard to fit along this edge. That's the way that opposite corner was done by a pro. When doing it with a miter box, to cut that 45-degree angle, you can see it's impossible to do with a standard miter box for something this tall. You can do it with one that goes in on an angle. I don't have that one. Or best bet is to have a saw, a miter saw that you can change on an angle, which I do have. So just to show you how to do it by hand and to contour that piece, what I did is I just took a piece of the baseboard and used my pencil to trace it. I used my saw to just hand trim around it. You can use an electric saw or a little keyhole saw. There's different saws that you could use, but by tracing that line and filing and taking that little keyhole file and filing all these contours, you can see I have a perfect fit. Now when I slide it up against the wall there, that wall might be a little bit off, but you can just go back with a file and file that and get it to fit perfectly. Once I get the length of this board to fit the length that I need back there. So it looks like I have the fit and the angle just right. My overall length though is just a little bit too long. So I'll trim that off. I'll nail that in place. And then I can just caulk that corner in. So with my high quality brushes, I keep them in the original packaging. It keeps the tips from getting all rustled or bent when I'm storing them. Another thing that I like to do to take and help keep from getting paint dried along the brush head, I like to dampen it and then get as much of the moisture out as I can, because when the paint dries in here, that makes the bristles really stiff. So by just getting it damp and then flip as much of the water out as I can and even dry it up, then it'll help keep that paint from drying it so fast that by the time I finish cutting in, hopefully I'll be able to clean all that out. It won't be all dry in the bristles. So when cutting in now, I like to really load up my brush and then dab it into place, and then I can just go right up against the ceiling and guide that paint edge about 1/8 of an inch away from the ceiling edge. If I was to go all the way up against it, your eye will follow that wavy line from the wall to the ceiling to the wall to the ceiling. So by just keeping it just below the ceiling, it will appear to have a nice straight edge. And then I don't have to mask. And masking this edge especially along a textured ceiling, you can't get a perfect edge. Now, if I was to mask the smooth wall, I could get a perfect edge, but then I'd have to paint the ceiling. And then if I go back, I can get rid of my brush strokes. And then when I roll this wall, I won't have to do more than one coat. So now that I've got all of the ceiling cut in and the corners, I'll start doing the baseboard. The baseboard's the same way. Let's do the ceiling. And it's just a matter of going about a 1/16 of an 1/8 of an inch above. And just smoothly run along that edge. So is this the only way to do it? No. Is there other ways? Oh yes. You can mask it. There are little edge paint rollers you can use. This is just a method that I've learned over the years that I really like. Works good for me. I've had a lot of compliments even from professional painters. So it's a great skill to learn, whether you're just doing it for your own home or if you want to learn to do this and do it for a living. I've known painters that make a very good living doing this. So now hopefully this cleans up good. It's been probably about an hour of cutting in since I got this brush wet. And you can see there is some dry bristles, but for the most part, it just comes right out. Now, had I not gotten this damp first, there'd be dry bristles that just really have a hard time getting them clean. But when you spend good money on a good brush, you take care of it,